So I've noticed some contradictions in the new French energy, green energy policy. So late April, France has sort of announced a new green energy law, um, and that will demand that the entirety of France will be carbon neutral by 2050. And compared to the current goal of only quartering the emissions by that point. And it wants to phase out coal and decrease CO2 emissions across all sectors. But interestingly, one item was that it will delay the phase out of nuclear. So currently, the law demands that by 2025, the French nuclear generation, which produces something above 70% of French electricity, uh, will be reduced to 50% of French electricity. And now the new law supposes to delay that and bring it down to 50% by 2035, 10 years later. And I find this quite interesting because it is essentially admits that the renewable generation that is supposed to replace nuclear and coal and so on cannot actually do that, because I think the French government realized that if we are reducing nuclear power, which is sort of the bread and butter power generator, then we cannot do that. Then we cannot replace that with solar and wind because they are intermittent, and that would cause a lot of problems integrating that and keep the reliability up. And now they are like pushing backwards the nuclear phase out, which is interestingly a centerpiece of French policy. I don't know why that. You can explain that by a sort of rational policy to reduce CO2 emissions, because nuclear obviously, especially already existing nuclear capacity, would be a really good base to start from if you want to reduce CO2 emissions in the power sector. But you can only see this as through the lens of politics and a public that is sort of misinformed by green ideology, and in addition to reducing CO2, also wants to get rid of nuclear power. So France is sort of the leading country in the world with nuclear power generation, and it absolutely makes no sense for them, under the goal of CO2 emission reductions, to just retire its reactors. I don't see any good reason for that. And the French government essentially said, okay, we can't have 2025. That would require us to install more gas-fired power plants, and that would ruin our CO2 emission goals.
Yeah, and it just is a pure example of how the standard that's being used is not any kind of pro-human standard. It's just this idea of being natural. And so renewable is considered natural and nuclear is considered unnatural. So even though nuclear is an actual way of lowering CO2 emissions and producing a lot of power for a lot of people, it is it is being attacked, and they're prioritizing attacking something that's actually doing the job that they say needs to be done all over the place, that's being done so little, which is essentially CO2 free power. And then they're going to go to the thing that's failing to do that all over the place.